I think leadership, especially principal being the manager of the school, has become increasingly more challenging, but yet absolutely vital. My belief system is that we need to appoint principals of better pedigree and quality. And of course, the principal becomes that actual person who makes the school work. And if a principal doesn't have the leadership acumen, doesn't have the administrative ability, and is not able to be a team player and certainly hold the team together, certainly we find that our schools will not become functional schools. One of the things that I identify is the difference between a functional school and a dysfunctional school. Clearly indicates that principalship is not about authority in terms of leadership, meaning that you need to not want to be the authority figure, but you need to be that person who can work with others and also be able to motivate others in terms of convincing them about your ideologies, your vision, and what your expectations are. Principalship is absolutely like leadership, that you're not a born leader, you're made to be a good leader. And to be a good principal, you need to go through experiential learning, you need to expose yourself to best practices, like what's happening at the ICP currently, going to conferences, learning from others, and being able to use those things practically in your school and where it is possible to adapt it to your school type. I've been principal of 3 different schools. I've been principal of a school of focused learning for sport, principal of a primary school, and now principal of a secondary school. What I found was that when I went to the primary school, I realized that lots of teaching time was also being lost because learners were moving. So if there were 700 learners in the school, each period 700 learners were moving, and they were taking between 5 and 10 minutes to get to a class. And a lot of teaching and contact time was being lost. So I then, through action research, use a stopwatch to actually visualize this and bring it to teachers in terms of research, how much actual time is being lost, and thereby convincing them that the advantages of the learners being form-based and teachers moving was much more productive in terms of the school. And then since moving back into the high school, I've changed the strategy there as well. And it's also had some of its positive aspects in the sense that now learners have all their requirements with them. They're not pulling bags around the school. Textbooks are heavy to carry around. Now they're based in a classroom. And so all the requisites are there, and learners can bring much more things to school and have it housed in their own room. And when it comes to inclement weather, when it's raining and so on, we don't have learners now playing in the rain or out in the rain. They've got the coverage of the classroom and so on. But similar to that is discipline. Now I'm a real disciplinarian in schools. And my belief system is that no quality education can take place in a school that doesn't have good discipline. And so one of the factors I focus on is things like late coming of both teachers and learners. And I role model that by believing that if teachers are late, then teacher can't ask a learner, why are you late? Same thing goes with teachers planning for schooling. Teacher must prep properly to ensure that learners are occupied fully and that learners get and receive the quality instruction. And so certainly a teacher can't ask a learner, where's your homework, if a teacher hasn't prepped properly for the classroom. And so everything becomes role modeled in our school. And one of the emphasis is on values in education. And I place a great emphasis on teaching values within the school. Things like what we call the ethical values in society. Things like honesty, things like responsibility, things like integrity. And all those play an integral part of working and developing a true citizen within our country rather than just an academic student in the school. I think clearly our education is going through a major crisis. I think that teachers are finding that they have less support coming from the department. My belief system is that we need to, both as professionals like South African Principals Association, other stakeholders, unions, the Department of Education, we need to probably have a think tank around this, reevaluate our education structure. I think in terms of curriculum remodeling, I think it's going to become much more important now. I think the current state of the curriculum assessment policy statement known as CAPS is certainly not working in our school. It's too overloaded. Teachers can't deal with the stress of assessments. I think there's more teaching taking place in school rather than learning. So teachers think that they're doing a lot, but they're doing very little. I think we can see through our results. Certainly our results in our schools are starting to diminished to an extent where even good schools that were getting good maths and science results and even literacy rates are starting to drop. Technology seems to be increasing in all our schools. The more technology we bring in, we're not seeing real change. And for me, real change means that students need to be leaving our schools with the required skills to be taking up the different types of challenges that's out there. And obviously, the economic structures of this country have certain demands on the future students. And I think our schools need to be working towards meeting those challenges of the skills gaps that we see. And therefore, emphasis should be greatly placed on trying to divert students early enough into vocational schools, looking at taking up talents in terms of artisanship, but also certainly looking at the academic skills for those who need to move into the faculties like medicine and dentistry and pharmacy and research itself in agriculture. We have a problem with water shortages in our country, experience the Western Cape. I see Gauteng is going through the same thing currently. How can we get students to understand how to actually get the natural resources or the strategic resources to be preserved and conserved? And how can we actually use that for the betterment of the country? So my belief system is that I think in education we become so dogmatic, we become so stereotyped in South Africa. Everything is benchmarked on exams, assessments, but less is being, I would believe, used in terms of promoting professional development, teacher development. In fact, if I was put in the position, I believe our schools need to close for the next 6 months, send everyone back for retraining, and get people back on track in terms of what needs to happen in our schools. My belief system is that all we're doing is we're like behaving like plumbers, or bad plumbers if I might call it. We're just plugging the holes wherever they creep up, but we're not looking at the symptoms and the sources of where our problems are. And I think we know those problems are there. I just think that we need to have a collective will and a political will in order to address those problems sufficiently. I think what we're doing, even in this conference, is about comparative research. And I've been listening to some of the papers in some of the rooms. I've been asking very pertinent questions. I was in a room previously in a breakaway session where a best practice from India was being presented. And my view was that we need to start comparing apples with apples and looking at countries of similar state like South Africa. If we're a developing country, then we need to look at other developing countries and what they're doing better under similar conditions and contexts like our country. And therefore my belief system is that funding is important. Then I think we will benefit with funding, but not funding just plowed in and left to the belief that government will use the funding sufficiently. I think the funding should come into this country under consultative review committee or a task team that can use that funding in order to address the collective needs and responsibilities. And I think for me, the beneficiaries of improving the education system are going to be the future citizens, and these are the learners currently in our school. And if we don't address that, we're going to see a big void and a big gap, because private schools are starting to mushroom in this country like I've never seen before. And the reason for the private schools mushrooming is because they have this individual flair of being able to address the needs of the parents and the challenges of the students, and whereas public education is lagging behind and is continuously going to lag behind. And I think with your support, and I think with this production and with the type of articulation that's come from principals that you've interviewed, hopefully that will help get more funding and be able to address some of the challenges that we've all articulated similarly. And my belief system is that this country's got a winning recipe if just there is a greater will in terms of investing and plowing the money in the correct channels in the right places. I mean, currently we're talking funding, we spend 25% of the budget on education. But if we looking at what we're getting in the output level, probably getting 1 to 2% in terms of outputs. And that doesn't show good for this country, especially in international benchmark assessments like the TIM study, the PULSE study, the SECMEX studies, shows that we are lagging far behind even other developing countries. And so my belief is that we've got the skills, educational skills, we've got the right people. We just need to make sure that we plow and direct the monies in the right places where the beneficiaries of those funds can actually transfer that into something more of benefit to this country. I think the question about human resources, and I think about the leadership expectations and the management expectations of principals. I was listening to a lady from India who said, in my school, I've got 2 chartered accountants who are doing my finances. I've got a lawyer who does my legal stuff. and I've got a HR manager who deals with the HR things. I think what the department expects from principals in South Africa is expecting a superman and a superwoman to run a school. And I can't believe that all schools in South Africa are equal by standard. My belief is that those schools, like fee-paying schools in top-end communities that get a lot of school fees, can employ people to assist the principal in some of these aspects. But where we take the bulk of our schools in South Africa, close to 85 to 90% of schools are no-fee schools. And those schools don't get sufficient funding. The principal then has to run a similar type of school with the expectation of reaching the same standards like any other school. And so one-size-fits-all approach is being plowed in, and an expectation is like a miracle. And my belief system is through what you're asking in terms of the question. I think our principals are overwhelmed, underpaid, and given so many things in terms of what the department expects of them, that many of the principals will fail a quality assurance assessment if done today, not because they're not good principals or good administrators or managers, purely they're just too overwhelmed with all the different type of tasks. And certainly what doesn't help principals is that their hands are tied in many respects. You find that the department does not support principals when it comes to conditions of service. Teachers can stay absent for as long as they want to, and it seems like there's no recourse action to support principals. Teachers come late to school, there's no support system. A teacher leaves the school, they need a substitute or replacement. The department doesn't have a system to support schools like that. You got to find a teacher, you need to recruit a teacher, you need to advertise in a newspaper, and you need to shortlist and make sure that you interview the right type of teacher. I've had so many opportunities. I was seconded to the Department of Basic Education at the Minister's Office in the Education Management and Governance section. And I couldn't wait a day to get back to my post back as principal, having worked in administration. For me, the children matter so much. I think you need a principal type in a school that's not an office-based principal, not someone who hogs the office. A principal's position is one where you meet all your stakeholders regularly, as often as you need to. So your stakeholders are critical, your learners in the school that make the school work, your teachers in the school who need your support daily, your parents who as collective stakeholders need to play their part in the school, your governance in terms of your governance structures that need to be accountable together with you, and of course your broader community that makes up the school, because they are your ambassadors that actually give you a good name or a bad name, and they're the ones who make comments about your school. And so you need all those stakeholders. But I always believe what is important to me as a principal is that schooling is not just about the triangle. It's not just about the teacher, the learner, and the learning content. I think out of my discourses on discipline and about precautionary and positive discipline is that something that's missing a lot in our schools is the fact about relationships. Is that we build too few relationships with all our stakeholders, be it the learners, be it the parents, and be it the community. And then we believe that we're not getting a buy-in. And my belief system is one way of being a good principal is being able to rally around everyone out there who's prepared to support, work with you, and make your school a great environment to be in. And so for me, I wake up in the morning, I can't wait for Monday mornings, I can't wait for the weekend to be over, because I look forward to being part of my school structure. And I'm such a positive person. My belief system is that principals need to be more positive whilst the challenges are there. If we're going to be negative, then it's like a captain of a ship. That ship is going to sink, and it's going to continue sinking because you're not being the solution, you're just bringing the problems to your school every day. So the principal's position in terms of doing so many tasks, almost a multitasker, I think that clearly indicates that principals unfortunately cannot multitask on the numerous accountability expectations. I think if we look at the Education Laws Amendment Act in terms of Section 18A, which now makes the principal an accounting officer, which was never before there, which means the principal is now accountable for the school finances, where it was a governing body's function in the past. So if anything goes wrong with funds and finances, the principal is accountable. If the results are poor in the school, the principal takes the responsibility for poor results. If the school safety aspects and security and all that are not in check, the principal has to face that. And if your teachers don't come to school and learners are not getting quality instruction, the principal needs to answer that. And my belief system is that the principal just can't do all those things. Whilst sometimes in some schools it's achievable because the ethos of the school is that teachers just do everything right, parents do their thing, and everyone contributes, makes those schools function well and the principal looks good. But in highly challenging environments, those principles just can't match up to some of our schools in the country. And therefore I believe that sometimes the government compares things unequally, and therefore it comes with this new liberalist society that you can't have an equal situation, an unequal structure of country. That's how it works. Having sat in yesterday's first opening session, which was really for me enlightening, listening to a person give you a concept of perceptions. I think we all go into schools with the perception of what we think happens in our schools. The question about stress, how we bring stress upon ourselves sometimes. And my belief system is that those stresses are there all the time. It's just that how we unearth those stresses in the situations we find ourselves. Today, this morning on neuroscience, explaining to us from a scientific point of view again, how do we look at situations within our school, how do we look at structures within our school, our paradigm shift, and how we need to change according to situations that's changing. And then certainly one of the other talks that I went to was about the left and the right side of the brain. The teachers need to understand, are they left and right side brain thinkers before they can assess the children in the class, whether they left and right side brain thinkers. And so I'm already pretty excited that lots of the work communicated, the papers presented here of high value to schools. The only thing again, I come back to the point, is many of the papers presented are reachable, are things you can use. Again, comes back to the context of the school, the parents that you have, and whether the parents can meet up to some of the research that's been meted out here. And of course, how many principals can actually realize and use some of these things which are value in their own perspective of running a school, but also in terms of how they're going to bring that through the rest of the team in the school and convince them of what they've heard here today. I always believe that I can be convinced sitting in a lecture or listening to a paper. How can I take that same paper and utilize it to convince others? I think that's just as important. There's so many different service providers providing training for principals, but the people who really should be provided the training is the Department of Education. Now, we as SAPA, South African Principals Association, has guided the department by coming out with what we call an induction and mentorship program for newly appointed principals and deputy principals. Now, my belief system is like playing any game. You can't play soccer or rugby if you don't know the rules of the game. The same thing with being a principal. If people do not give you and train you in terms of the rules of the game, which are important for running a good school, then the first thing you need to know is about the legal and legislation that governs you as a principal and how to guide your school when it comes to the legal issues. And so therefore, my belief system is that a principal is only qualified in terms of showing I have paperwork. So I've got a B.Ed degree or a master's degree or whatever it might mean, it's meaningless as a principal. And what we have in our country is there's many principals who went from being a level 1 class teacher to being promoted as principal. And so the question is, how do you lead someone or be a principal when you're a novice and you need to be advocated and trained yourself? And so therefore, what this country needs is that principals need to go through what we call a non-examinable but a portfolio-based principals 1-year program where you can now go through experiential learning in a school where someone comes in, sits in and guides you, supervises you, develops you, and then you have to write a paper or do an assignment based on good practice and what's expected. And so policies, principals are not trained to be policy writers. And so how do you write a policy? So the department walks in and says, can we see your 11 policies? And you say, what's these policies you're talking about? But someone has to train you in writing policies and what is expected out of policies. What's the legislative framework that makes up policies and so on. So therefore, those who go through B.Ed honors courses at universities get trained in financial management, get trained in policy and legislation and all the legalities and research methods and quantitative and qualitative research and all those fancy terms. But how do they actually practicalize it in terms of the school setting is far-fetched. Many principals don't know how to use action research in their schools. A simple thing like why children don't use the toilets in the school is an action research program. How do they actually use that? So the fact of the matter is that principals can't land in a job without being trained. Competency levels need to be also checked. Do you have the flair for the job? Sometimes you apply, you're successful, but you might not be made out to be that. I think we need to use what Finland does with their teachers. Because Finland, to become a teacher, you need to first pass an interview to be a teacher. You may have the qualifications, and the entry requirements to be a level 1 teacher in Finland is a master's degree. In South Africa, if you don't succeed in something else, the next thing you go to university, you do a PGCE, you become a teacher, and later on you be the principal of the school. And so I think clearly principalship is not heavily based on qualifications. While that is important, I think it's based on training, mentorship, induction, advocacy, and a total input level from various stakeholders that can assist you in being a better principal. But I think in our country that's absent. It's like you just land up, you got the job, they leave you on your own, no one introduces you to nothing, and you must find your way. It's like they always say, when you're a child at school, you want someone to help you find yourself. When you get into a job and you got a boss, there's no time for someone to help you find yourself. You must find your way. And I think being a principal is a difficult job because no one trains you for it.